So the I-STARR project is supported by a grant from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and it's part of the larger NIH Helping to End Addiction Long-Term, or the HEAL initiative. It's also one of several projects that comprise the Consortium of Addiction Recovery Science, or the CEUs network. So this training is actually the third webinar in the I-STARR training series, but it's the second training that is geared specifically towards folks who are operators or providers of recovery housing. Now, what does that mean? It means that we've developed webinars with specific information about operating recovery housing that may be particularly useful or relevant to folks who own, operate, manage, or otherwise assist in the day-to-day or week-to-week functioning of recovery housing, whether that be the CEO of a large recovery housing organization or a senior resident with governance or management responsibilities. That said, we also encourage folks who are stakeholders or different kinds of stakeholders who are unfamiliar with the activities that recovery residence operators engage in to attend these webinars to get a better sense of what operators do and what residents receive while they're living in recovery housing. So let's go to the next slide. So this next group of slides may look familiar to folks who have been at previous seminars. This is the I-STARR team. I'm Dr. Amy Miracle. I'm a research scientist in the Alcohol Research Group at the Public Health Institute. I co-lead the I-STARR project with Dr. Carmen Masson, who is a professor of psychiatry of psychiatry in the School of Medicine at UC San Francisco. The team also includes co-investigators Sarah Zemore and Lenny Jason, biostatisticians Mina Subbaraman and Libo Lee, and communication specialists Diane Schmidt and Dustin Kebsu. Next slide, please. So the I-STARR project activities are also guided by a 17-member advisory board comprised of a diverse group of leaders from across the country. So while most advisory board members wear many different hats, they do represent some kind of broad stakeholder groups. We have recovery and recovery housing leaders, treatment providers and payers, national policy advocates, and researchers and educators. And I'm pleased to say that many of our advisory board members will be presenters in this webinar series. Next slide, please. So we have two different presenters for this webinar. I've been very fortunate to have served with both of these folks as members of the board of directors for the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, or NAR. These presenters are Beth Fisher-Sanders and Joel Bagley. Let me introduce Joel first. So Joel currently serves on the NAR board and co-chairs the Affiliates Committee, which provides technical assistance and guidance to emerging state-level NAR affiliate organizations. Joel's experience with recovery began with his teenage son entering addiction treatment in 1996. The recovery experience was so transformative for their entire family that Joel soon left his corporate career in communications and became a certified addictions counselor. In 2003, Joel and his son opened a level 3 recovery residence called Purple Inc. in Atlanta, Georgia. Joel and Purple Inc. sought the help of the Georgia Association of Recovery Residences, or GAR, to ensure that Purple would always operate as a certified and quality recovery residence. Joel served as the president of GAR from 2007 to 2009 and was instrumental in the formation of NAR in 2011. So that's a little bit about Joel. We'll also be hearing from Beth Fisher-Sanders, and her experience is equally impressive. Beth is a writer, trainer, mentor, and advocate for ethical standards-based recovery housing, recovery support services, and community building. Beth began her career in 1988 as a counselor in a women's recovery residence, and it was there where she witnessed the powerful and healing nature of the recovery community. So this experience, as well as her experience in long-term recovery, has guided her mission and vision ever since. She's worked in all areas of the recovery continuum as a peer, clinician, and supervisor. In 1996, Beth founded Hope Recovery Resources, a I-STARR Level 3 recovery residence serving co-occurring communities in the Southeast. She's a longtime advocate for standards and ethics, and in 2011, Beth facilitated like-minded leaders from across the country to organize and form NAR, and she served as its founding board president. Beth continues to serve NAR as the chair of the Standards Committee and also serves on several boards of NAR state-level affiliates. So with those introductions of these amazing folks, I'm going to hand things off to Beth and Joel to present on the topic of recovery residence management and operations. So next slide, please.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Excited to be here, and I'm really pleased to see some unfamiliar names and faces because our recovery residence community, while it spans across the country, we get very familiar with each other and lean into each other. So if you are new to recovery residences, I just really want to welcome you to be a part of this community, that we get to practice what we preach in fellowship with each other. And Joel and I will talk more about this, but I know I couldn't do without people like Joel throughout the years to do this kind of work. So welcome. And let's find out who we are in this group. So let's start with this poll. If you would identify the letter that best describes you for poll number 1. And then Justin will give a poll for you to fill this in. And then for poll number 2, identify the aspect of recovery housing, if you are an operator or a part of a recovery home, that's the most challenging for you. And that'll help us guide discussions too. So fill in what fits best for you in this poll we have, and feel free to use the chat as an initial point of discussion. And let's see what we come up with. Do we have our results? Okay, so it looks like we have a good showing from recovery residents, operators, owners, or staff. That's great, and really pleased to see a number of researchers and curious about the others. So feel free to fill us in on how your other applies in the chat. Would like to know more about you. And then what do we find is a predominant challenging aspect of owning or operating a recovery residence? I'm not able to see the chat. So Joel or Dustin, do you notice anything
Beth,
there?
can you see the poll results? Did that screen open for you? It looks that like 40% said funding. 20% said resident management, and then we have 15% community neighborhood engagement, other, and the smallest was staff management at 10%.
Got it. Yep, I am finding that now. Yes, and hear ya on the funding aspect. Hey, if you're in the recovery residence business who make a lot of money, I really want to caution you on that idea. I don't think that would fit for too many people. There are a lot more efficient ways to make a living. But yeah, funding is a big challenge. We have very low margins as a rule for recovery residence operation. The management is stress, isn't it? That is a challenge in itself. Staff management, if it's not the residents that are challenging us, it very often is the staff. NIMBY, neighborhood, yeah, we'll at least touch on all of those things. So thank you for your responses. All right, next slide. Let's launch into what we hope to cover today. So we have an hour, and all of these objectives, any one of them could be a full day presentation in itself. And so the objectives are fully covered in the notes. I encourage you to get PDFs of those. We do touch on them, and Joel and I will be discussing these aspects, the elements of a mission-driven recovery residence, because that's so integral to what we do as operators. And we will certainly touch on the features to support our staff and residence leaders in doing what's the most important thing we do as operators, and that is facilitate, create safe space, emotionally, physically safe space in community. And then to identify partners in your community who can help and support your mission. Very deep topics, all of them in themselves. But as Joel and I were setting out on considering this presentation, which we hope will be the first of two. Next month, we will be covering specifics of policy and procedure. So the ideas we're going to be talking about here will flesh out some more next month into policy and procedure. So do note the next presentation. But what we thought about, Joel and I, full disclosure, are decades-long friends and operators of recovery residences in Atlanta, Georgia. And we have leaned on each other a lot throughout the years and have become very close in that. So I think what we would like for you to take away is some of the bits of our lived experience, call it wisdom maybe, of what is it, Joel, over 50 years of combined experience. I can't even believe I said 50 years combined experience. It's a long time. We both,
I know, I didn't know you were that old, Beth.
Thank you, Joel. But I think I can speak for us both that even after all this time, we still really are passionate and love what we do. We both really like to talk about what we do and dissect it and understand how it works and what doesn't. So we'd like to share with you in this time we have together some of the things that we've learned over the years. That's really at the heart of this discussion in a conversational way, because Joel and I talk all the time. So we'd like you to be included in that conversation. So let's jump into the next slide then and consider this business of recovery residences. So, and we wanted to start with that. And the first word is business. Because so often we forget, I know I surely did forget, that it's a business. I am a trained social worker, started out as an addictions counselor, eventually found recovery after I started my career. I was 5 years into a career in substance use before I found recovery for myself. Thank God I did. And when I did, they told me when I was leaving treatment, hey, Beth, you need to go to what they were calling it then, a halfway house or 3/4 way house. And I looked, I was a single young woman, and that was a totally appropriate recommendation for me. And I looked in the area I was living, there was nothing for women at that time. So that really planted a seed, that in my previous experience working in a recovery residence, where I just, as my intro said, I saw how recovery residences were so impactful for recovery. And I wanted that for myself, and I couldn't find it. So 2 years later, I set out to solve that problem by creating my own recovery residence. And you had a not dissimilar story to that, right, Joel, for starting your own business?
Exactly. It a little different in that it wasn't me, but with having had that experience of a family member and watching them find recovery in community, it became something of like, how can we help other people do this same thing? So that part is exactly like your experience. It's all about how can I help someone else? How can I facilitate it for someone else?
Exactly. And so we're so lit up with that desire to serve, to help people, right? And therein comes our mission, if you will. So if I were to summarize my mission, then and now, is to create safe spaces, safe communities for people in recovery, in early recovery, to bridge that gap from early recovery to sustained recovery. That really hasn't changed, and that has been and continues to be the passion to serve. What I wasn't strong on in that moment of starting that first house was understanding that this is a business, right? So does the business promote recovery is a key question that we had some interesting discussions reflecting on that awareness. I think you had a little bit more awareness of that with your background, Joel, but do you want to talk some more about the business of recovery residence?
Sure. And yeah, so one of Beth and I's good friends, one of the first questions that they threw in this section was, does the business promote recovery? And my first thought was, well, there's two questions within that one question. The first one being, is it's presuming that you are operating a business. Does the business? And I think that's the mistake that I've found that so many people make. They came here to help people, and they didn't realize they were running a business. And some people even think, oh, no, I don't want to be running a business. I'm not here to make money. I'm just here to help people. Well, I promise you, if you aren't aware that you're running a business, you won't be here very long. It's I don't know how many of you look at what happens in small businesses, which is what recovery residence owners operators are, until they get over 50 employees, and then they're classified as something different than a small business. But most small businesses fail within the first year, and it's because the business owner doesn't realize that they have a business that they're running. They think that they're here to promote recovery, to come back to ours. And that's a really important piece. If we're not promoting recovery, we don't have any business being here either. We are operating recovery residences. But it's both of those things. It's both and we've got to be aware of that. And I think that's the challenge. I mean, even for me with a somewhat, having run a few businesses, small businesses along the way before I got to this, I had a better idea maybe than some. But even then, it was still a challenge to realize that this is a business and I've got to run it differently. I've got employees. I mean, I didn't at first, but within that first year, I had hired someone to be on staff. I had a partner, my son, whose livelihood also depended on, him being able to take home a paycheck at least most of the time. I had a family, I had a daughter who's going on, getting ready to graduate high school, start college. So all of those things, we still had all the responsibilities of life, and we're starting a new business, and we've got to make sure that that business is successful. So we just got to pay attention to both sides of that question of, does the business promote recovery? Or because we are in the business of recovery residences.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that I was so caught up in the recovery aspect that I didn't really do due diligence on the business aspect. Like I really should have had a more comprehensive spreadsheet of costs, that I had. I'm just gonna get a house and rent out the rooms and do community meetings and drug screens. And that's good. You need all those things. Those are basic to running a standards-based ethical recovery residence. And there are 1,000 other variables to consider, like location, like setting, houses versus apartments, and all the costs associated with each are going to be variable. And how many staff do you need? Because you cannot do it all yourself. And that's a really important point too, is that even if it's a small one-house operation, to expect yourself to do everything, that's not quite realistic. So costs are important to consider, and letting the mission be a driving force is fuel for it. So anything more to share about business before we tackle a little bit of mission, Jewel?
No, I think this is a good place. Well, I will say, we are not trying to provide you a webinar on how to run a business today. That's another week-long series. And you need to go find what works for you. So they just know that there's a lot about running a small business that you need to know, and we're not here to provide that today because we don't have time. But we are going to, because we want to focus on the recovery residence part of your business, and we're going to let you, do all the work there. But I think it's a good place to segue into mission, Beth, because I think that, as you and I would say on this next slide, that it is the having a really big why you do what you're doing is so critical, because I promise you, while it seems like I just want to help people and it feels so good to help people, that feels great. It won't take very long before you will run into the uncomfortable and the unpleasant parts. And without that big why, you don't have anything to sustain you. Maybe I could.
The why. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I could share a story of a fellow Guard member. I remember, and I'll do this quickly, but she had a big desire to help people. She had a great corporate job, so she had a good income. She had, some financial, some money saved up. And so her thought was, okay, I really want to help women coming out of the prison system. That was her passion. And so she went out, she rented an apartment, and she, knowing, okay, I've got some money, I can, pay for this, I can pay to furnish the apartment, I can get it up and going for a month or two, and then they'll, the women will start showing up and it'll be self-sustaining. Well, what she found was there was a lot more to it than that. And pretty soon, when she couldn't get a regular stream of women coming in who also helped fit in her business model, it became overwhelming. And within a year, she ended up saying, maybe this isn't for me, because she found herself like, this is costing me a lot more than I'd planned. And my just my desire to help people was not enough. So that's why I say you really need that bigger why of what am I here to do, and am I really willing to take on the whole job it takes of running a recovery residence.
Right. Yeah, the why is complex. It's the fire that keeps us going. The vision is how will the recovery residents change the world, basically? How will what you do with your recovery residents elicit change in the community? And that vision really fuels the mission, which is the big why, or who are we serving? What is our focus? Okay, and as we're talking, I would encourage those of you that are thinking about recovery residences or have one, just refresh on this. What is your why? What's the mission? The vision and the values are really about the culture, how we do things in our recovery residence. What do we value? And what does our community, what do we facilitate our community in embracing as culture? Okay, and that is always at the forefront of all of our decision making. Does our recovery residence service align with vision, how we will change the world, who we are serving, and how we're doing it? They all flow one into the other. We need that understanding of our why, and a reference I would give you, I think we have it in the resources, is really one of my favorite TED Talks ever, and it's by Simon Sinek. He wrote a marvelous book on getting to the why, and also a very popular TED Talk on why that will inspire you if you have not seen it. But really, these whys are the fuel and direction and compass for all that we do.
And Beth, a lot of the people, in fact, 40% or whatever, responded that funding was their biggest challenge in operating recovery residence. And that particularly is a really good reason to have your mission and your vision solid, because when you have a funding challenge and all of a sudden a funding opportunity comes along, but it's not quite aligned with what your mission is, there's going to be that temptation of, well, maybe if we took this grant and we started doing this, then it'd make it easier for us to have the cash flow that we need or whatever. And, but then you begin to have this drift of like, who are we?
Yeah.
Are we out here to chase grants, or do we have a mission and a purpose that's, unique to us that we think, you know, this is a place we can only feel. And so when that funding opportunity comes along, all you have to do is look back at the, you know, what your mission is and go, does that fit into our mission? And if it
Yes.
does, great, there's money. And if it doesn't, you know, we've got to be able to say, no, I need to stick with my mission and not be distracted by funding, because if we're short on funding, it's easy to get distracted.
That's a really good point. You know, when we lose our focus, we become ineffective in what we do. And yeah, so often you will hear of businesses that are challenged because of that mission drift.
Well, we better keep moving, Beth. 'Cause
Yeah,
I know
we do need to keep moving. Let's talk about really that core responsibility in the next slide that we have, and really is at the heart of any recovery residence mission. It has to be that at the beginning and end of the day, the consideration is the home safe. And I think this picture just summarizes that we as owner operators hold that responsibility in our hands. And this is the biggest lesson I've had as an operator, because doing this for so long, and why I need my friends, you know, on this call, like Joel and Amy, is because it's a heavy, heavy responsibility. We deal in a disease that kills people. We work with people in their homes. Sometimes people die in our homes, and that is traumatic. I mean, it's just that. It's the worst day in a recovery residence operator's life, is finding that an individual that we are here to serve is not with us when we come in to do our morning rounds, check, and, you know, get grounded for the day. It's awful. And so everything we do has to be centered around that safety. And then there's emotional safety too. And that's no small issue. Most, if not all, of those that we serve have had some kind of trauma. So that being in this family of choice can in fact be quite triggering or very scary. Having meals together, well, for many, a big part of my recovery residence roles, and I'm sure many of you, is sharing meals together. Dinner times could be a time of trauma for those we serve. So it's scary to come into a group of people we don't know, and be asked to contribute and function as a family. But that responsibility is first and foremost, capital R responsibility. It's a weight we carry, but it's the core tenet of how and what we serve.
And, you know, Beth, I think it's one of those things that I don't think anybody could have ever told me this. And it took me years of operating a recovery residence, you know, because my focus during those early times were, okay, so what's the programming we have? What kind of meetings are we have? What sort of support are we providing? How are we, integrating them into the recovery community and participating in community meetings? You're focused on all of that, but it took me years to realize that as an operator, my very primary responsibility was to just provide a safe space for recovery to happen. I mean, even though we would have a little saying we would offer a lot of times when we maybe were talking with family members, and we'd say, you know, the real magic of recovery happens long after the staff goes home. And I had a men's recovery resident, so it's these guys sitting on the back porch sharing. And I would say that, but I don't know that I really believed it deep down for a long time, until I finally got the idea that it's not my job to actually provide the recovery. It's my job to provide this safe space, to, you know, to provide a home for these people to live in, that they're going to be safe in.
For
Whether it's
recovery
I've
to
got them.
grow.
Yes, you know, whether it's in the lock zone and it's no, you know, extension cords that are being fire hazards, or whether it's the emotional safe space that they can sit on that back porch and they can have those conversations and they can become real with each other. You know, that was all my job was. And when I figured out that, it became easier. It still was a really heavy lift, but I think you're right that when, you know, our responsibility with a capital R as the operator is not, you're not responsible for the outcome of every individual, but you are responsible for like providing that safe environment, that space where people can heal and grow and connect again.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, some of that comes from the actual policies and procedures and the smoke detectors, the cords. Oh, and let's not forget COVID. If there were any challenges around safety considerations, boy, we got them a couple years ago, right? From the practical to the emotional, but also that culture that you're talking about, Joel, is important. How do we support, and what do we actually do if one of our peers is struggling or even has a psychiatric emergency or a medical emergency? Have we laid the groundwork for creating a culture that is confident and can lean into what we know to do when those things happen, that we know who to call because we've talked about it in community meetings, and we've had older residents share their experience with us, and all of those things, when they're done with intention, really help to minimize the risk. Because that's really what we started this piece with, is that this is risky business for everybody, working in home environments. But there are some concrete things that we can do to facilitate the not so concrete things like culture, to minimize the risk.
And you know, when you speak of culture, Beth, and because I think that's a good segue to the next slide on staff roles, it's something you do really well. And part of creating that culture of the home is how we as owner operators relate to our staff, to help the staff be extensions of us and be part of our same mission and vision that helps create that culture. So maybe you could share some of that. You do it so well.
Well, thank you. That is certainly, again, lived experience, because it wasn't a deep consideration. I had a partner too starting out, and for many years, it was the two of us with some part-time, and we experienced growth and realized, hey, we gotta spread the wealth here and have staff, and that staff has to understand what our culture was. You know, I found recovery in 12-step community And certainly that is a foundation for many recovery residences, mine starting out too. But as we evolved, we were able, because of the way we support staff and train staff and really practice what we preach with what we as leadership train our staff and support our staff in, is exactly the way we hope our staff and want our staff to engage with residents in a safe, peer-based, lived experience sharing, rather than an authority telling what to do. We are leaning always into our experience that we are people serving people, teaching people how to serve each other and community. That's really what we're helping our staff and empowering. That's a really important part, is that we are empowering staff to be leaders. And that's there's a difference between leading and facilitating and telling people what to do. You know, we really believe that recovery is an unique process found by individuals in community. And so staff are there to be a container, hold that community, and light some sparks and do some matchmaking in that community. And we do that as an administrator now of the recovery residence. We do that with our staff, that our staff coming in that are new to the organization have mentors. And I'm fortunate to have staff that stay a really long time. I always say, I'd love for you to make your career here. This is a community of staff and residents. We are all a community. So when a staff comes in, they get a mentor who has been further down the road and can share with them. So, and there, you know, we've had all kinds of titles for our staff, and there are lots of ways to do it and lots of positions. There are senior resident roles. We have that in our organization. We have more of a peer coaching approach, and it's all fits. They all do different aspects of the organization. And that's one thing that Joel and I would certainly recommend, is that when you think about all the roles that are needed in your recovery residence, write them down. No one person can do them all. That's the bit of wisdom that we can share, is that you will need help, leaning into that help and instilling culture and empowering them to lead and facilitate is a key piece.
And Beth, just to clarify, because Beth and I, we use the word staff a lot, and yes, we both ran level 3, so we probably had more paid employees than some recovery residents. But the staff word for us is inclusive of volunteers, of peer mentors, that might also be volunteers or might be coming through a third party, service outside or something. So we don't just mean employees, because a lot of you, especially when you're first starting recovery residence, and if you're running something more of a level 2, then you probably don't have as many employees. But for us, this talk about staff is about, lots of things. I know we're about to run out of time here, Beth, but this might be, we could, Amy, and you let us know if we need to move more quickly to the end. But
well, why don't we talk about the community? Yeah, that's it.
Yes,
I think the last slide is really important.
And I'll just say real quickly that my piece on community is one of those staff roles, and if it might be your job, but is engaging your recovery residents with the larger recovery community is such an important piece. And I used to think, man, if we just had somebody or some place where our guys could go get jobs easily without having to do all the usual rigmarole of hunting and finding a job. That piece is that's a staff role who's like managing your residents and helping them, get re-engaged in the community that way. But then there's also the simple parts of, well, is there a recovery community organization or an RCO nearby that provides other kinds of support services that you can connect them with, so that during the day, maybe before they have a job, they've got some places to be. Beth, what's your what would you add to that?
I think those are all really important. Those reciprocal relationships, finding people and organizations that serve in a similar way or need a community of support like you offer. I've known many recovery residences that do partner with work sites that will accept people from criminal justice. That's really hard, right? In a recovery residence, often to find a job. If you have a record, how are you going to help people solve that issue? And there are organizations that want to align with people who need jobs. So also referrals, how do you get residents, and aligning with the treatment centers, IOPs, PHPs is important. A big learning I had was that I don't need to fly under the radar. When I was starting out, I was so afraid of letting the neighbors know what we were, who we were, because I had fears of going to city council and reporting us. It wasn't very rational, and it certainly wasn't wise. What I quickly learned is that our neighbors loved us, first of all, because they didn't have to worry about messes or parties. They actually were really nice about things like picking up garbage, raking leaves, because that's the culture that we try and promote, is that we are part of this neighborhood and can lift our heads up and be of service in that neighborhood. So don't fly under the radar. Let your city council know what you're doing. Find partners within the local government so that you can be supported along the way. Chamber of Commerce is another place to get support, and all of those things can help lay the groundwork and be preemptive around NIMBY or not in my backyard issues. So be loud and proud about what you do. This is a vital service that we provide in our community, and our community can only support it if they know we're there.
Well said, Beth. Well said. And Beth and Joel, thank you so much. It was a very tall order for you to talk about all the things that you talked about in an hour-long presentation. But I think that you did an amazing job covering several different aspects, all the key aspects of recovery housing operations and management. Because we probably couldn't go into much detail as we would have wanted, why don't we go to the next slide? Beth and Joel prepared some resources for folks. So next slide, please. So on this slide, they've found some journal articles highlighting aspects of recovery housing operations and the recovery housing environment, and listed some tools as well. And I'm going to drop, I think that all of these journal articles are publicly available, and I'm going to drop those into the chat now. But with all of the information that Beth and Joel were able to impart, let's go to the next slide and launch into any questions that folks might have for these amazing presenters on the topic of recovery residence operations and management. And feel free to raise your hand, drop a note in the chat, whatever is easiest. We definitely want to have you take advantage of Beth and Joel while they're here as presenters.
It can be also your own thoughts. We'd love to hear from you if anything resonated with you, if you came away feeling concerned, I don't want to do this anymore, or validated. And yeah, that's my experience too. We'd love to hear you. Is it Reese?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you because I didn't think of it as in a business aspect. But my background is in permanent supportive housing with HUD. And I'm new to this domain with recovery housing and RCCs and all of that. So I've always been in the background thinking like, I just want to help people. But it is in actuality, it is a business, and encompassing the culture within it to maintain it is important. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see Don Roberts.
Yeah, I have our residential director here, and we were wondering about the roles of house managers in level 2. We're operating a level 2 program right now. We don't pay our house manager, and so it's really pretty limited. We were wondering your guys' experiences of what we should expect from the house manager.
It's a great question, and there's no one right way to do this. And I suspect you do compensate. You might not pay actual money, but you compensate in the living situation. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
Yeah. So a typical house manager would do things like a curfew check, or curfew checks during the week, or at least begin a triage for crisis management. Most often it's the drug testing, the curfews, the support around rule management. The key for any position, though, is that the title be fleshed out with a job description. And in fact, that's one of the standards for recovery residence certification, is that those jobs, whatever it is that you expect from your house manager, that it align with your mission and that it be clear and delineated. Anything else to add to that, Joel?
Yeah, I think you covered that very succinctly. Thank you.
I see John with his hand up, John Major.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both for a wonderful presentation. You really brought me back listening to you, how far the recovery community, recovery home community has come in the last 30 plus years. And I think networking and having these kind of discussions are only going to propel things forward. I just want to say a little bit about the business aspect of running a home, regardless of the NAR level. I do a lot of consulting, and I serve as an expert witness against NIMBY cases, not my backyard. And oftentimes the other side, the pro-NIMBY people are making the accusation the gross exaggeration that these recovery homes are purely a business entity, that they're out to make money. And certainly there is a business aspect and you need to be cognizant of it. But I think to the point that you said, I just want to emphasize a little bit is providing an atmosphere of recovery. You know, most recovery homes do that, and you should not be at all shy of saying, yes, there is some overhead. And if you think about it, what I like about the recovery homes that I've really stood up for in these legal procedures is that when they have more people in there, because that's a big no-no, you know, they think that, you know, somehow the community is going to go corrupt if they have too many people living in a home. But there is some research showing that there's greater therapeutic effects with more people in these residences. But from a fiscal viewpoint, you can make the argument, and I've done this before, well, because they have so many people in there, it defrays the cost, and therefore the recovery home operators are more selective who they want in their recovery home, so they could ensure and enhance that therapeutic atmosphere. Because unfortunately, poorly run residences, they'll take anybody just to, you know, make the rent, because they're not really applying some foresight. So I just wanted to weigh in there and say that the business operation costs, they are a reality, but when handled appropriately, they could be responded to in a way that promotes a therapeutic atmosphere. And you all know, when you go into a recovery home, you could kind of feel the recovery there. You know, it's there. Thank you.
Those are really great points, John. Thank you.
And I just want to answer real quick because I saw it pop up in chat. Someone was saying, I'm a house manager. Where do I go to get CPR training and Narcan training? CPR is probably pretty widely available in your community. There's a lot of organizations that will provide CPR training for free or very low amount of money to a one-day class. And Narcan is often that training. If there's a recovery community organization, often that's one of their missions, is to both distribute Narcan and to provide training. So those are, I know those are just two broad starting points, but you shouldn't have too much trouble these days finding a training for both of those things.
Thank you, Beth and Joel. Great questions. I'm really glad that we were able to get some discussion in. And I hate to cut it short, but I do want to make sure that I prime people for what's coming up next in the training series. So if we can go to the next slide. So we do have one more training in the month of August. We have a researcher training focusing on sampling and collaborating with recovery residence operators and providers. That's coming up on the 15th. And then next month, Beth and Joel, thank you for reminding me, this is really part one of a two-part series. The provider webinar is going to focus on residence policies, which will dovetail nicely with this presentation and be able to flesh out kind of how stuff is operationalized in the house. And then we also have another researcher webinar in September as well. And before people log off, I want to make sure that those folks who have registered for the 12 series, or the 12 webinar series for the provider series, complete the evaluation form that will pop up when you leave the webinar. Those who have who participated in all 12 of these webinars will receive a certificate, the opportunity to have their name listed on the I-STARR website as completing this series, but also you can also receive CEU credits, NADAC CEU credits for completing the 12-part series. So please do fill out that evaluation form if you're part of the series, you've registered for it already, or are thinking about registering for that, and you can register for that on the I-STARR website. So I hate to cut things off, but we do need to stop at the top of the hour. So thank you very much for your participation today, and we hope we see you back at another webinar. Bye, folks.